everyone, welcome back to Evelyn and Peter. I have something a little bit different for you guys today, but I'm super excited about it and I hope you guys like it. It's actually going to be made with Off the Hook Faux Fur yarn by Lion Brand, and if you've never worked with this yarn before, it's a little bit different, and it's one long strand, but the strand has these little loops on it, which is how we're going to be making our project. So this means we don't need any hooks or needles or any tools. We're just going to be using our hands and pulling the loops through the other loops just like that to create our project, which is this super fluffy, large, there's my dog in the background, faux fur pillow. And so if you don't know how to knit or crochet, that's great because this is super beginner friendly. To make it, we're just going to be making 2 large square panels and then taking the yarn and sewing all 4 sides together to close it. You're also going to need some poly-fil stuffing or a pillow insert. I am using a pillow insert for mine, and before I seamed the sides shut, it was about 16 by 16 inches. And then when I stuffed it with my pillow was actually really big and squishy and a little bit bigger than that, so it kind of fluffed it out a bit, and so it ended up being maybe about 18 by 18 inches. But yeah, you can use whatever you have on hand, an old pillow or the stuffing. And the only thing that you are going to need to make this design besides your hands and the yarn and the stuffing is a yarn needle. So we're just going to need this to sew the sides up when we're done, and that is it. So I hope you guys like this project. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions or anything else that you guys want to see from me. And thank you guys all so much for the support and for subscribing. So I hope you guys like it. So to begin this project, all you need is 3 skeins of Lion Brand Off the Hook Faux Fur yarn. I'm using the color Baked Alaska, and you will only end up using about 2.5 skeins of it, so you'll have some left over. And you can see that on this yarn it has little loops that are already on the yarn. So we can make this pillow by just using our hands by pulling the loops through. So you don't need any hooks or needles to do this. The only thing you will need is a yarn needle to sew your pillow together at the end. So you can see that this yarn has little loops going along all throughout, and this is the loop that we're actually going to be working through. So these little loops, you'll always be pulling your working yarn through these to create a stitch. And to get started, I counted 16 loops across, so you can go ahead and count out 16 and just lay it out in front of you. If you want your pillow smaller, you can just count less, or if you want a little bit bigger, you can count more. Mine ended up being about 16 inches by 16 inches when I was finished. So after you count out 16 loops, you need to take note where that 16th loop is, and then the loop next to it will be our 17th loop, and you're going to take this loop and just pull it through the 16th loop. So after you've pulled the 17th through the 16th, that is our first stitch, and you're going to continue with the next loop. So on the 15th loop on the left is where you're going to bring in your next stitch. So I like to kind of pull my working yarn around so that it's easier to handle. But now we're just going to work back down the row. So take that next loop on your working yarn and pull it through the 15th stitch, which is the one right next to where you just pulled through. So take the next one and just pull it through. And then you're going to repeat the same exact thing. Take that third loop that's on your working yarn and pull it through the 14th loop. And I kind of like to just keep my finger in the previous loop just so I know that it's not going to pop out by accident. Make sure you're not tugging too tightly just to be sure. And then again, you can take your next loop and pull it through the very next loop and just continue all the way down. And when you get to the end, you should have a total of 16 loops still. Your stitch count will not change throughout this entire pattern. So Just pull one loop through each loop, working all the way back down until you get to the first loop. Okay, and now you should have a total of 16 loops. We've made our way back down the row, and you can see this is my 16th and final loop. And that's the very first loop we're going to be working into on our way back. But first thing we want to do is turn our work. So go ahead and flip your work. So this way we can work back down the row just as we did before. So take that very first loop on your working yarn and pull it through the very first loop of your row on your pillow. And just as before, we're going to be pulling one loop through each loop on our pillow. So take that very first loop on your working yarn, pull it through the first loop on your pillow, and then go ahead and grab the next loop on your working yarn and pull it through the second loop on your pillow. And sometimes the little loops can be hidden and tucked behind, so just make sure if they've flopped around to the other side that you just pull them up. You want to make sure that you don't skip any. They can be easily missed if you're working with the fur yarn. So just go ahead and pull one loop per loop, work your way all the way back down the row, and your loop count will still stay at 16 loops. So after you make it down to the end of this row, you're going to be doing the exact same thing. So just go ahead and turn your work and then pull one loop up per loop on your pillow, and do this until your piece measures approximately 16 inches or the preferred length that you want. And then I will meet you guys back here to show you how to do the bind off row and what the next steps are. So I also wanted to show you really quick what to do if you run out of yarn on your skein and you need to bring in a second skein. It's really easy, and all you have to do is leave one little loop unworked in your pillow, and we're actually going to cut that so that we can create a tail and use that to tie together to the new skein of yarn. So take that last loop and just feel in between where the loop connects. You can feel a very thin strand, and that's what you want to cut. So you can just go ahead and snip that, and make sure that you're not cutting the actual loop. You want to cut at the very bottom of the loop where it's connecting it together. And then that leaves a tail long enough for us to bring in our next ball of yarn. And if your tail of yarn on your second ball isn't long enough, you can just go ahead and cut the very first loop on that one as well. So snip that, and then it leaves a few inches for us to tie a knot. So just take the new ball of yarn, tie it together with a knot, and then after that you can just go ahead and proceed as you have been by pulling one loop up per loop. And it will make a small little knot, but that is okay. You can barely see it with the fur yarn, and we will just tuck it into the pillow or tuck it to the back side of the panel. So whichever side the knot is on will be the inside of your pillow, so you won't even see it. So just go ahead and give it a tie, and then you can continue with pulling the loop up. Make sure that the length is good in between, and then just give it an extra little knot on the back just to be sure it doesn't come undone. Okay, so now your pillow should be approximately 16 inches in length. Mine is about 16 by 16. And now I'll show you guys how to bind off the very last row. So if you're familiar with knitting, it's going to be very similar to that. So let me show you. You can take the very first loop on your pillow, and then just as you have been, take that very first loop on your working yarn and pull it through. And then take the very second loop of your working yarn and the second loop on your pillow and pull that through as well. So now you should have 2 loops, and you're going to take your second loop that you just made and pull it through the first loop. So now you only have 1 loop that you're working with. And then take the very next loop on your working yarn and the third loop on your pillow and pull that through as well. So pull through, and now you should have 2 loops again, and you're going to take that loop you just made and pull it through the other loop. So again, you only have 1 loop that you're working with, and then take the next loop on the working yarn, pull it through the very next loop on your pillow, and then take the one you just pulled through and pull it through the other one. And you're just going to do this all the way down the row. You should only have 2 loops, no more than 2 loops at once that you are working with, because we are binding off the top. So just do this all the way down the row until you reach the very last loop. Okay, so now I've worked my way all the way down the row, and I've done the final 2 loops and pulled the very last loop through the one that I'm holding. So now I just have 1 loop left, and what we need to do next is tie off and cut some length so that we can tie our panels together. So if this is your first panel, you can just go ahead and cut maybe the first loop on the working yarn, and then just go ahead and pull it through the current loop to tie off, because you don't need a long length. And then when you make your second panel the exact same way that we just did, and then bind off on that second one, and this is the one that we're going to leave a really long tail so that we can sew the 2 pieces together. So the same exact way how we cut our yarn to join 2 skeins of yarn together is what we're going to be doing to create the long tail. So for every little loop, it's being held by that tiny strand, and we're going to be cutting those to create a long tail for sewing. So just go ahead and feel for the tiny little strand in between every single loop, and just go ahead and cut several of those. So make sure you're not cutting the actual loop, because we don't want to disconnect our yarn. And if you accidentally do, that is fine. You can just tie a knot. Make sure you're just tying it securely. So just like I'm doing, cut the strands, and you can see it pops open and is starting to leave a long length of tail that we're going to use. We're going to use this tail to sew all 4 corners of our 2 panels of the pillow together. And again, if you are on your first panel still, you don't need 2 long tails for both squares. You only need a long tail on 1 square. So if you're doing your first one, you can just cut a couple of the loops and then go ahead and cut the yarn and pull that yarn through your last loop to tie it off. So just as I'm showing here, you can just go ahead and take that last loop and pull the tail of yarn through. And then if this is your second panel, you need to continue on by cutting several more loops. Okay, so now I've cut a bunch of loops, and we're just going to test it out and see how long it is to make sure we have enough. And all you want to do is just loop it around the perimeter of your pillow a few times and make sure that you're going to have enough yarn so you don't run out while you're sewing it together. I ended up having some left over, so you might not need quite as much as I have. I wrapped it around 3 times, and you could probably get away with only wrapping it around just over 2 times to make sure you have enough to sew it. So again, just like the other panel, go ahead and pull the tail of yarn all the way through to tie it off. So take your 2 pillow panels, and if you've tied on new yarn, just make sure that the knot that you created is going to be on the inside of the pillow so you don't see anything sticking out. And then take your second panel and just lay it on top of the first one. Make sure that the row directions are the same so you can kind of see my rows from before. They're leaving little horizontal lines. Just make sure that you have both of them laid the same direction. And then you can take a large plastic yarn needle and just loop the tail of the yarn through your yarn needle. And don't worry about the ends of the tails on any other part of the pillow. You can just tuck those in. You don't need to worry about weaving them in. And then we're just going to take the long tail that we made and use it to sew together. If you would rather use a crochet hook and join it together that way, you can do that as well. You can either slip stitch it together or work single crochets around the outside. Just take note that that might take a little bit more yarn than what I have here. So just go ahead and thread the yarn through your yarn needle. Once you have it thread, all we're going to do is just mattress stitch our two pillow panels together. So don't worry about where you're specifically inserting your needle. This yarn is super forgiving and you can't see any of the stitches with the faux fur. So don't stress about making sure you're putting it in the correct spot, or if you're skipping anything, it's totally fine. You just want to try and keep it even. So make sure your panels are lined up evenly and that you're not puckering one side or anything like that. And first thing you're going to do is take your yarn needle and put it through from the inside to the outside of the top panel. So go ahead and stick it through and then just pull it all the way through until the entire tail is through the front panel. So you can just see I'm sticking it really anywhere and just pulling it through. And if you have a super long tail, it can take a while to pull the whole entire thing through. And then after that, we're going to do the exact same thing, but now just sticking it from the inside to the outside on the bottom panel. So again, we did it once from the inside to the outside on the top panel, and now just do the same thing and pull it all the way through on the bottom panel. And our panels are now joined, and then we're just going to do this all the way down. So again, on the front panel, work your needle from the inside to the outside, pulling your tail all the way through. And then after that, go directly across to the back panel and work your needle from the inside to the outside, pulling your tail all the way through. It's very simple, and this will help secure our pillow shut nicely so that if you're using pillow stuffing or the insert, you won't be able to see any of it. So just repeat the same process all the way down the first side of your pillow. When you get to the corner, just continue on and work down the second side. And then when you get to the next corner, work down the third side. And then when you get to the fourth corner, you can work maybe a few inches of it and then go ahead and stop. And that's when we will be filling our pillow, and then I'll show you guys how to finish it off. Okay, so now I have all three sides of my pillow sewn together, and I've left the fourth side unworked. And now I'm going to be stuffing mine. So I'll show you guys how to do that. I'm just using a large pillow insert, and mine is actually probably about 18 inches. I didn't have one that was 16 inches, so I just went up in size, and it was completely fine because the yarn just stretched out. And it fit the pillow insert actually really well and made the pillow look extra squishy and cozy. So just go ahead and stuff it in. And if you don't have a pillow insert, you can also use poly-fil stuffing, which they have at any craft store. So you can just stuff it as full as you want or as little as you want. And then just continue on with what you've been doing by working your yarn needle through both the panels and sewing it shut until you get to the very corner and the entire thing is sealed. Okay, and now I've sewn all four sides of my pillow, and you can see that it's extra big and squishy, but there's no holes peeping through, so you can't see the pillow insert. I ended up having plenty of yarn left over. And we're just going to take this tail of yarn and weave it through the inside of the pillow. You can do it a couple times if you want to. I just stuck it in and pulled it all the way through, and then you can just go ahead and cut your yarn and tuck the end of that tail inside your pillow, and that is it. I hope you guys liked this cute DIY faux fur pillow. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and thank you guys so much for watching.